"5 miles above the moon, Dave Scott and Jim Irwin looked out the window of their lunar module down toward Al Worden in the command module, which had completed its separation maneuver. Beneath them, the 15,000-foot peaks of the lunar Apennine Mountains. Soon they would fly low over those peaks on their way to a landing in a little valley in the mountains of the moon.
Coming up on pitch over. P64, okay? Bam LPD. LPD. Coming right.
Out their window, they could see the sinuous meanderings of the lunar canyon known as Hadley Rill as they brought their lunar module, call sign Falcon, toward its landing, and the beginning of what would be one of the most significant chapters in the history of scientific exploration.
9% fuel. To 200, minus 11. 150, minus 7. Minus 6. 120 feet, minus 6. Minus 5, 100 feet at 5. 9% fuel, minus 5. 80 at 5. Minus 3. 60 at 3. 50 at 3. Cross pointers look good. 40 at 3. 33. 25. 2. Okay, I've got some dust. 7% fuel. 20 at 1. 15 at 1. Minus 1. Minus 1. 6% fuel. 10 feet, minus 1. 8 feet, minus 1. Contact. Bam. Okay, Houston, the Falcon is on the plane at Hadley. Roger, roger, Falcon. No denying that, we had contact. Houston, the Hadley base here. Tell those geologists in the back room to get ready, because we've really got something for them.
Scott and Irwin were located on an undulating plain situated between the Apennines and Hadley Rill, an area selected by the scientists as being one of the most geologically significant sites on the moon.
Okay, overhead hatch is open and latch.
2 hours after touchdown, Dave Scott stood up in Falcon's upper hatch to survey their landing area.
Oh boy, what a view. I can see Pluton and Icarus.
As Scott stood describing the craters and mountains, we on Earth perhaps did not yet realize the scope and extent of the coming mission. Aboard the lunar module was a small dune buggy-like car called the Lunar Roving Vehicle, or just plain Rover. The astronauts would travel miles in collecting samples and placing and conducting experiments.
There are no sharp, jagged peaks. There are no large boulders apparent anywhere.
They would observe the layering of the lunar terrain, most clearly seen in the formation 14 miles to the south, called Silver Spur. This layering, later to be observed in the mountains and the rill, gives scientists a direct look at the structure of the moon and a deeper insight as to the significance of the collected samples. The journey of Apollo 15 had begun 4 days earlier, July 26, 1971. The crew, Dave Scott, spacecraft commander and veteran of Gemini 8 and Apollo 9. Jim Irwin, lunar module pilot, who would explore Hadley Rill and the Apennine front with Scott. Al Worden, command module pilot, who would remain in lunar orbit operating an extensive array of cameras and experiments and making observations which, when coupled with the surface work of Scott and Irwin, would give the most comprehensive picture of the moon's structure and history ever achieved.
We have complete clearance for launch. We are go. 15 seconds. Guidance internal. 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence start. Engines armed. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All engines running. Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff at 9:34 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Tower is clear.
And we have a roll program. Roger.
Precisely on schedule, 9:34 a.m., Apollo 15 lifted from the pad on its way to the moon.
And we have a pitch program. Roger. Roger.
With the exception of a few minor problems, the trip out would be uneventful. The command module Endeavour, carrying the lunar module Falcon, would arrive in lunar orbit with Scott's announcement,
Hello, Houston. The Endeavour is on station with cargo, and what a fantastic sight. Oh, this is really profound. I'll tell you, this is absolutely mind-boggling up here.
Gentlemen, I can well imagine that a foreign planet must be a weird thing to see.
July 31st. After a night's rest, Dave Scott descended into the lunar morning.
Okay, Houston, as I stand out here in the wonders of the unknown at Hadley, I try to realize there's a fundamental truth to our nature. Man must explore. And this is exploration at its greatest.
Scott was then joined by Jim Irwin.
Oh boy, it's beautiful out here. Reminds me of Sun Valley.
Their first job was to get the lunar roving vehicle out of its storage bay.
Looks like she's coming down okay. No. Hey, can you pull it out a little bit, Jim? About that. That looks good. Boy, is this dirt soft. Like soft powder snow.
Next, the astronauts tried out the rover. During this test drive, one failure showed up. The rover was designed to steer through both its front and rear wheels.
But I don't have any front steering, Joe. Like this rear steering, Dave. Yeah.
In use, the absence of front wheel steering would hardly be noticed. Then they loaded the equipment they would need for their geological survey and boarded the rover for their first exploration.
Okay, we're moving forward, Joe.
Roger.
They were headed toward St. George Crater, located on a mountain slope above Hadley Rill to the south of the landing site.
Hang on. Man, this is really a rock and roller ride, isn't it?
There would be a stop to collect samples at a smaller crater called Elbow, then arrival at the base of St. George, and a look into Hadley Rill.
Oh, look at that. Oh, look back there, Jim. Look at that. That's beautiful. That is spectacular. This is unreal. The most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Scott then adjusted the television antenna on the rover. A 250,000 miles away, in Houston's Mission Control, a flight controller operated the television camera mounted on the rover. Scientists and engineers on Earth could directly monitor the lunar exploration. And those of us at home watching on television felt like the third astronaut on the moon.
It looks fairly recent, doesn't it? It sure does. Okay, now we got the fillet, we got the soil, now we need to sample the rock. Yeah.
The astronauts began to collect samples and photograph the area. The samples would consist of rocks picked up with a rake-like device, soil samples, selected rocks, and chips taken from boulders.
Can you imagine that, Joe? Here sits this rock, and it's been here since before creatures roamed the sea on our little Earth.
They would also drive core tubes into the lunar soil to collect contiguous specimens from beneath the surface. But now it was time to return to the lunar module, not to end this first work period on the lunar surface, but to begin another phase.
I can't believe we came over those mountains. We did. It's just a beautiful little valley. Yeah, Yeah, those are pretty big mountains to fly over, aren't they?
After returning to the LEM to load equipment, they moved to a nearby location to set up a science station similar to those left on previous missions. With the establishment of these experiments, a network of scientific stations was achieved which would allow triangulation of events and give us the ability to locate precisely the origin of lunar events. As they worked, one of their instructions was to throw the packings as far as possible from the site. Dave Scott.
Now, I'll give you a demonstration here, Joe.
Roger, right on.
Here, Joe.
Spectacular demonstration.
Oh, well, enough of that. Lovely.
What was that a demonstration of, by the way? It started out to be of gravity, and it wound up being of centrifugal force, I think.
Using an electric drill, Scott sank a tube into the lunar soil, into which a probe would be placed to measure heat flow in the lunar material. The difficulty in drilling would delay placement of the second probe until the next day. The science station was then activated, and Scott and Irwin closed Falcon's hatch on EVA number 1.
And Tchaikovsky is big enough so that you do get some, at least optical impressions of the central peak being higher than the ridges, but I think it's just because the basin is
60 miles above the moon, Al Worden orbited in the command module Endeavour, operating experiments, his observations adding to the wealth of scientific data already accumulated.
Okay, I'm looking right down on Electro now, and a very interesting thing. It looks like a whole field of small cinder cones down there.
The detection of cinder cones, clearly of volcanic origin, helped solve another element of the controversy about how much of the moon was formed by volcanoes and how much by meteoroid impact. Worden was operating a series of experiments in the scientific instrument module. These included a mapping camera to shoot lunar features and simultaneously the star field for accurate location of these features, a panoramic camera, a laser altimeter for accurate topographical mapping, and a series of experiments to analyze the chemical makeup of the lunar crust. In the estimation of a number of scientists, this orbital research station would provide the most important information collected during the mission.
Okay, down the ladder to the plains of Hadley.
August 1st, Scott and Irwin prepared for their second day on the moon. And as Scott checked the inoperative forward steering of the rover,
You know what I bet you did last night, Joe? You let some of those Marshall guys come up here and fix it, didn't you? It works, Dave? Yes, sir. It's working, my friend. Beautiful.
their destination was the base of the Apennine front. Here they hoped to find some of the basic substance of the lunar highlands.
As we drive up sun here, I can see Mount Hadley, and the linear patterns in it are really remarkable.
Then they began the physical sampling of the Apennine front, stopping at 4 craters in their traverse.
Oh boy, it's a nice little crater in it, it sure is. Okay, Jimmy, let's go to work. Roger. Look at that. Almost see twinning in there. Guess what we just found? I think we found what we came for. Crystal and rock, huh? Yes, sir. You better believe it.